Okay, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to my UFC 283 fight card prediction for Glover Teixeira versus Jamahal Hill. So there's a lot to get through on this one. So what I've tried to do, as I did with the last one, is to focus on the fighters I know more about. So there will be a few omitted. Now, because this is a pay-per-view event, there are quite a few fights, so expect a really long one. Okay, so the first fight will be contested between Josiane Nunes and Zara Fern. I'm not going to go too deep on this one because it's women's MMA. Now, these two have a rather large disparity in height and reach, with Zara having a significant advantage in both categories. But don't let that shit fool you. Despite Josiane Nunes having a really odd looking style, and at times she looks a little bit goofy in there, she's demonstrated some really brutal knockout power, and she has no neck, so she can really take a bit of a smack. Uh, she hits like a man, is on an 8 fight win streak, and generally southpaws are quite awkward at times. So with this in mind, I expect this to end not brutally because women's MMA, but Nunes should be a safe bet straight up on the money line. And while I think she will get a finish, I expect it to be a standing TKO if it's anything. So avoid a specific bet like that. It's way too risky. She's also a massive favorite, so part of a parlay would be the way to go rather than laying on too much. She seems to be in and around, the -520 mark. It's going to be difficult for you to find anything more favorable than that, so it will be difficult to make money on her straight up. Okay, so the next fight is against Wale Alvarez and Nicholas Dalby. Now, this one is a really tricky one to predict. If you look at Alvarez's career, for example, he's had some really stiff competition. He's fought Kamaru Usman, and he was even responsible for giving Covington his first loss, albeit it was very, very early in Colby's UFC career. Dalby has had some decent wins in his career. He's fought and beaten Alex Oliveira and Claudio Silva, but he also lost to Tim Means, which is just horrible. And some of the decisions he's been involved in have been really sketchy and dubious. Now, if you put a gun to my head, I would probably edge Dalby, who is the slight dog in this one. However, as a betting man myself, I would probably favor this one going the distance. I'm edging Dalby, but as a betting man, I'd stay away from both these men as I expect it to get really scrappy, and we know how the judges can often fuck these ones up. So I'm going with this one to go the distance. Okay, now this is where things get really interesting, and for me is probably the first potential banger of the card. So starting off with Terrence McKinney, he's coming off a knockout loss against Drew Dobar, who looked fucking excellent against Bobby Green, who never gets finished, and Dober managed to finish him as well. So most people are actually picking McKinney to win this one, as he has really dangerous knockout potential. The problem with him for me, and I've kind of hallmarked this in a lot of previous um fighters that have very similar attributes, is that if he doesn't finish the fight in the first round, he tends to struggle later on. Now, I think Bonfim is quite resilient, and if he can get through the first 3 or 4 minutes, I think he's going to make it really hard for Terrence. So I'm going to go against the grain here, and I'm going to take the underdog and say that Bonfim has a really tricky first round. He might get dropped, but I think he survives the round and then he takes over as the fight goes on. And I've got him winning by late stoppage or 29-28 decision. Just realized I've misspelled decision there, so nicely done. All right, now the next fight on the card is a matchup at bantamweight between Luan Lacerda and Cody Stamann. So looking at Cody first, he has a really unbalanced record in the UFC. So in his last four, he has three losses. But in fairness, those were against some really good guys. He fought Saeed Nurmagomedov, who I have called the runt of the Dagestani litter in the past. He's fought Merab Devashvili, who I fucking despise, and I've said in various videos as to why I despise that little gremlin. And Jimmy Rivera, who's very decent as well. Also, his only win has come against Eddie Wineland, who, despite being a worthy contender in the past, has basically become the litmus test now for up and coming bantamweights. He's so past it at this point that it's kind of tragic. Now, Stamen does have a notable draw with Song Yadong, who has really surged recently, despite losing to Corey Sandhagen. But Song has really greatly improved since that fight, and I reckon he would beat the brakes off Stamen if they fought again. So take that as you will. Now Cody is very balanced. He's decently explosive on the feet. He's a very capable wrestler. My biggest fear with him is that he's aging in this division. I mean, he's only 33, but in this division, that's reasonably old. And I feel a decline for him is going to come sooner rather than later. So for that reason, I'm going to pick Luan Lacerda. Now, Luan hasn't really faced anywhere near the same level of competition, which makes him a really significant risk in this one. But he has a nice height and reach advantage. And I think Cody might revert to wrestling here if he can't win the stand-up fight, which may be tricky. And I can see Cody taking it to the floor and Lacerda having a significant advantage as a BJJ practitioner. So he's going to be a serious threat on the ground. Now, he's a significant underdog in this one. You can get Lacerda at plus 290, plus 330 in some places. So people are heavily fading Cody to win in this one. But I'm going to take a risk. And I'm picking Luan to win by late submission or unanimous decision. 29-28. Okay, fight number 5. I'm not gonna spend too long on this one. I mean, just look at these two men. Jelton is significantly younger. He's significantly stronger. He's far more explosive, and he's likely on the old secret juice. He's been fucking guys up, and by comparison, Shamil looks fat, sloppy, and far too old now. I think he's in his early 40s. Yeah, he's 41. So this is one of those ones, again, you parlay and maybe boost the odds by picking Jelton to snatch an early enough finish. I'm expecting this one to end brutally in a blink and you miss it type destruction. I think Jelton's gonna fucking mollywop him. All right, so fight 6. This will be contested at lightweight between Thiago Moises and Costa, who is making his UFC debut. Now, he has a very respectable 19-5 record, and it includes a variety of different finishes on the feet, and he's demonstrated that he has a really decent submission game. They both have a similar reach and a similar height, so it's very difficult to draw too much on that. And obviously, Costa is the southpaw, so as we know, southpaws can be a little bit awkward. Now, Costa has demonstrated that he's very durable and very tough, and I think he's going to give Moises a really difficult time here. However, the disparity in competition here is enormous. When I used to argue about Islam's rise through lightweight, one of my biggest arguments amongst the MMA group we have was how much of a hard time it took Islam to get Thiago out of there. Now, in that fight, Thiago actually managed to take Islam down, which in hindsight looks fucking amazing. And he managed to last until the 4th round, looking pretty good in the process. Well, relatively good for how you can look against some of these guys have been looking against Islam. Now, we know, however, that MMA math is fucking ridiculous. However, I think that Thiago is very underrated. And while this one would be difficult, I expect him to come out and take this one by unanimous decision. I think this fight, I can see this fight going the distance. I think Costa's very durable. I think he will be difficult to get out of there, but I expect Moises to have a reasonably dominant performance. I expect him to maybe take it 30-27. Okay, now the next fight is between Gregory Robocop Rodriguez and Bruno Ferreira. Now this one has the potential to be serious fireworks. Both of them are KO guys, and expect them to come out looking to take each other's heads off. Bruno has a very impressive record at 9-0. However, he's taken this fight on very short notice, and I think that really has to be noted here. Rodriguez has the advantage in reach, he has the height advantage, and despite being listed as a grappler, he doesn't really use it unless he really, really needs to. And lately, he's been collecting heads. One thing that you should be wary of in this one is that Gregory got really badly busted open in his last fight with Chidi. He had one of the nastiest cuts I've ever seen in a fight, which in very different circumstances could have had it called off. Now he's had time to recover from this, but we don't know how easily he will be to open up again, and he might not be so lucky next time. So, given the wide disparity in odds, I would stay the fuck away from this one. However, sticking a parlay on this one not to go the distance is the play that I would make. We saw it in the last fight with Sean Strickland that sometimes jumping off the couch with no fight camp can be to your advantage. But in this one, I don't expect that to be the case. I'm picking Gregory to win by TKO in the first or second round after they both trade like barbarians fighting over a mastodon steak. Uh, yeah, I just think playing this game with Rodriguez on short notice is going to be a very big mistake. And I think Rodriguez is juiced to the gills as well. I'm just going to put that out there. All right. Next fight on the card is contested at light heavyweight, and it's between Shogun Hua and Ihor Peteria. Shogun is a legend of the sport. You know, he's done some incredible things in mixed martial arts. He's a former champion and probably would have had a much more defined and damning legacy in the sport if it had not been for Johnny Jones. Uh, Now the problem is he's old as fuck now, and he's looked like a drunk bin man in his last few encounters. So both these, like, while both these men come in with a similar height and reach, Ihor is far younger. You know, he's been in the game long enough, and he seems a lot hungrier. He did suffer a brutal loss in his last encounter with Nikolai Negamoranu, and to be honest, there's no shame in that. That man is ferocious. And to be fair to Ihor, he took some really good shots before relenting, so he's proven that he has a very decent chin. This is one of the easier picks on the card for me, and I'm expecting Ihor to bounce back and get a finish. Otherwise, he might as well just fuck off out the door right now. No, if you aren't beating Shogun at this stage of his career, you have no business being in the UFC. You know, at minus 205, that's decent enough odds. You can make decent enough play on that, taking the money line. Now, this is one of the more intriguing matchups for me on the card, and this is between Paul Beardew Craig and Johnny Walker. Now, Johnny has a significant height and reach advantage, which at this weight class can be especially telling considering the power that's on display at times. Now, Craig has some really significant wins, four of which came in his last five, and one of them actually coming against main eventer Jamahal Hill, who I'll get to later on down the card, where he pretty much ripped his arm off. I mean, if anyone can remember that, Hill's arm was hanging off like meat on a chicken bone. It was gross. Now, interestingly, Johnny Walker also fought Hill, but he was brutally KO'd in the first like minute and a half, I think it was. So, according to MMA math, Paul Craig should be the obvious pick here. The thing is, though, like I believe stylistically, this is actually a perfect matchup for Johnny Walker for two simple reasons. Firstly, Paul Craig has literally, well, virtually zero threat on the feet. He's just not very good on the stand up. And secondly, which people often overlook, Johnny Walker has some really underrated takedown defense. The problem is that Walker sometimes fights, you know, like he's got a concussion. So there's a risk that you might follow Craig down to the ground like a fucking idiot and get caught in one of Craig's nasty submission attempts. It's absolutely possible. However, there's now like an obvious blueprint to beat Craig, as demonstrated by Volkan. Fuck, I mean, that fight was so ugly. Basically, you just need to stay on your feet, don't follow the man to the ground, and you should bag an easy win. So for this reason, I'm taking Johnny Walker to win this fight by brutal KO, and it has to be a KO. I hopefully he won't be dumb enough to grapple, or maybe not so much grapple, but certainly not go down on the ground with Paul Craig, who genuinely is one of the best submission artists on the ground at that weight class. So I feel they're setting this one up to give Johnny Walker another push. He's a very marketable guy, and this is a style of fight that definitely favors him. So I'm taking Walker by TKO. Okay. Next fight is at flyweight. At least I think it's at flyweight. I don't really give a fuck. Between Lauren Murphy and Jessica Andrade. I'm probably being a little bit disrespectful on this one, so bear with me. So looking at the fight metrics, you can see that Lauren Murphy has a 6-inch reach advantage, and she's 4 inches taller. So on paper, she looks like the much bigger girl. However, this is a really terrible mismatch for me. Jessica hits like a man, and despite being shorter, she is significantly stockier. She has a very muscular frame, and dare I say it, she's more lesbian. I think she's going to be really difficult to take down, and I expect her to beat the fuck out of Murphy in this one. And now, I don't mean this as a disrespect to Murphy. She's a very decent contender. She's had some very good scraps along the way. She's had some very, very notable wins. But this isn't the feelings business, and I have to call it as I see it. I think Andrade goes in to knock her head off and send her head into orbit. And however, with it being women's MMA and MMA math being what it is, there's a strong possibility that Murphy makes it to the bell, but I'd be very, very surprised. And this is another good one on the money line to cram into a parlay. You're going to get like minus 145, but again, I'd cram that into a parlay. Or if you want to take a little risk and boost the odds a little bit, take Andrade by TKO. She has an incredible level of takedown defense. She's a decent enough wrestler, so I can't see Lauren Murphy doing anything to her there. And if it stays standing, she's gonna batter her. So I can see this ending, late first, early second round. Okay, next up on the card is I'm pretty excited about this one as well. This is a fight between Gilbert Burns and Neil Magny. Now, if you look on Tapology, Burns is being heavily favored to win this one at 80% at present, and I can understand it. There's fairly good reasons for it. He just reminded how good he is with the war he had with Hamzat Chimaev, and he had some really good moments against Kamaru, where with a bit of sense and patience, he really could have finished that fight. Now, Burns is often spoken about for his BJJ credentials, but he's actually finished virtually no contest that way. So I'd expect this one to be mostly contested on the feet. And this is where the risk kind of comes in for me. Burns has really struggled with fighters that deal in straight shots, and Magny is that kind of problem. He has an unreal reach advantage. I mean, it's almost 10 inches, which is insane. Um, Magny also has a tendency to kind of clinch when things get hairy. And while I think this will help him to some extent, I think Burns is incredibly strong, has a good center of gravity, and I think he'll be able to negate this when Magny tries it. While I do think Burns is going to win this fight, at these odds, again, I'm staying away from this one. You can't get Burns on a very good money line. He's at minus 130, sorry, minus 435, and I think he will win. I think a TKO is too risky. Magny is tough enough to. He has been finished, but he's a tough guy to get out of there. Um, so I think if you want to make cheddar on this one, I'd go with a unanimous decision win for Burns, or another good play might be for the fight to go over 2.5 rounds, which you can get at really decent odds because, like I said, Burns is very heavily favored in this one. And I think they're doing Magny quite a lot of disrespect, to be honest. So I'm going with Burns by decision, but I think it's going to be closer than people think it's going to be. Okay, now we get to the real meat and potatoes of this one. Uh, and it's the quadrilogy between Davidson Figueiredo, who's the current champion, and Brandon Moreno, who snatched the interim belt. I think it was 5 or 6 months ago. Now, first of all, let me just say, mad respect to both these midgets. It's rare we get to see four fights between any contenders, let alone of such incredible quality. So hats off to both these children. If I was bringing in someone new to the sport and saying, "Look, son, this is what this MMA shit is all about," I would point to this bout, and regardless of a winner, it's almost guaranteed to be a high quality chess match on display with two of the best in the entire sport. Fuck just the division. These guys are elite. Now, personally, before we get into this, I think we should savor this one as it's likely to be the last bout between these two men, maybe. Now, for those of you that don't know, these men currently share a win apiece against each other and also had a highly disputed draw, which involved Figueiredo getting a point deducted, rightly or wrongly, which led to a draw. And they were three fights of resounding quality. Now, both these men are pretty much skilled everywhere and can win this fight in a variety of ways. Now, for those of you who saw my breakdown of flyweight back at the beginning of January, you'll know where I'm going with this one. There are a few things that make Moreno the pick here, despite how close the two are in ability. Now, firstly, Davison is 35 years old and he struggled to make weight in the past. And I don't imagine it's getting any easier for him the older he gets. And I think this will be a factor here for a guy that basically cuts weight all the way to the day of weigh-ins. In addition to that, Moreno's been active since his last contentious loss against Figgy, where he showed a really incredible performance against Kai Kara France, who's a surging and really tough contender in his own right. The one issue here for me is that Brandon obviously may have been affected by the whole Kraus drama. You know, he lost his coach, he lost his gym in the build up. But given his profile and status, he ended up landing under Fortis MMA, which are a very decent gym, or a trainer under there. So it shouldn't affect him too greatly, I'm thinking. Now, this one is being seen as a pick 'em by the bookies, and the fan and media are equally split. I mean, you could literally go anywhere and you're going to find different opinions. This is very split. Now, given that Brandon is younger, with more room to improve, he probably is going to have an easier weight cut. He's been more active, and in the three fights they've already had, he's the only one to have a finish in those three bouts. These these give this a reason to edge Moreno for me. Now, most gamblers among us will usually place a bet to make a fight more exciting. You really don't have to do it for this one. This one's gonna deliver. I mean, I'm gonna knock on wood right now, but I'm this as far as fights on paper, this has the biggest potential to not be complete dog shit. But if you do fancy a flutter and you can't pick between the two men, the fight to go the distance is a very high possibility. Like I said, they fought three times and they've already been in there for 13 plus rounds with each other. So that for me would not be a bad way to go. Okay, so now we get to the main event of the evening. And this will be contested for the light heavyweight championship of the world. Now, firstly, before I get into my pick on this one, I just have to say this. The fact that this fight is even happening is fucking embarrassing. Glover basically turned down a fight with Ankalaev and Jan Blachowicz and has basically still been rewarded with a title shot, which to me is disgraceful. And Jamahal Hill is ranked fucking seventh, for Christ's sake. And, you know, he has strung together some really nice KOs, but they've been against Johnny Walker, whose chin is just made of paper, glass, whatever you want to say. And he's brain dead. He has a zero fight IQ. And he also beat Thiago Santos by TKO in the fourth, I think it was. And that guy has like two surgically repaired knees. I've got a lot of respect for Thiago Santos, but that guy is he's gone through so many injuries. So the word through the grapevine really was that this fight was basically made out of spite. Um, just because of the whole embarrassment surrounding the title fight between Ankalaev and Blachowicz. So it's pretty much made on the spot. But anyway, I could go on about this all day, so I'm just going to leave my opinion on that alone now. The most surprising thing for me in all this is actually the betting lines. Hill is being favored at minus 130, and by a fan majority as well, which is fucking insane to me. I know Glover is an old cunt, but he was winning the fight against Yuri and kind of threw it away. And so he was retaining against the guy that for me is the scariest cunt in the entire division in Jiri Prohaska. Now, Hill has not faced anyone of that level. Like, Glover's shown an iron chin. He has a smothering takedown and submission game. And these two things have proven to be really big weaknesses for Hill in the only loss of his career. I mean, he lost to Paul Craig, and Craig basically ripped his arm off. Uh, so if Craig can do that to you, I know MMA math aside, I don't know what Glover's going to do to you. So I'm going to go against the grain here, and I'm going to say that Glover wins this one. I think he's going to survive an early Hill onslaught. I think Hill's going to be headhunting, and Glover's going to find a way to get him to the mat. And I think once it's there, Hill has no chance. I can see him getting choked out. So I'm going to call like a submission or a technical KO by going unconscious for Glover within, and I'm going to call it early. I think it's going to be in the first three. I don't think he even has to pull this one late. Now, don't get me wrong, Hill is very dangerous on the feet, but I just feel that Glover is really so experienced in there, and people are forgetting how much fight that old dog still has. Hill winning actually might be better for the division moving forward because I don't see Glover fighting for longer than I think he'll probably have one more fight on him at most if he does win. But I can't overlook Glover here. He's so good, and as an underdog, he's the guy you've got to make a play on at plus 110 with the experience that he's got and the competition he's faced. You can't overlook Glover, so I'm picking Glover to win by submission. Okay, so what I've done here is I've given kind of an overview of what I think the more safer plays on the card will be. I think Josiane Nunes is very safe to take on a money line. I think Alves and Dalby are both going to neutralize each other, so I can see that going to the judges. I think Jelton obviously by money line is very safe, but I think he's going to win by stoppage. Thiago Moises on the money line, Igor on the money line, Burns on the money line, and Andrade on the money line. If you put all those together, you should get yourself up to a really decent parlay play that can make you some money. Now, if you're looking for a bit more of a long shot, Bonfim by money line, he's a big underdog, as is Luan. Most people are not picking those, so tread softly if you're going to bet on those guys. But you don't have to bet too big to make much money on those two. Walker by TKO. Now he's a decent amount on the money line, but if you want to take a shot and put him up to really big odds, take Walker by KO because I think he's going to do it, or by stoppage. Moreno on the money line you can get at evens, and Glover you can get on the money line at, he's a slight underdog, which you put one or two of them together, you can boost the odds massively. Thiago Moises and Costa to go to the judges is another potentially good one. And if you want to boost Gilbert Burns, instead of taking him on the money line, I think it's a bit of a long shot. Not too much of a long shot compared to the others, but Burns by decision could be a very interesting one as well. Okay, so before I head off, I just want to say thanks a lot to the people who've been tuning in. The views are gradually increasing, and I was really particularly surprised at the reaction I got to the reaction video I did last week on the last card. So please look out for the reaction for this one. I literally will watch the fight and I'll drop the video maybe half an hour to an hour after the event finishes. So if you're somebody who wouldn't mind hearing that, please tune in. And yeah, thanks as always, and have a really great week. See you in a bit.